The most overpowered classes in Lost Ark are supports. They can't solo a group raid, but they are basically required for 99% of raid parties for the raid to even function. For new players, this is my #1 choice if you want to experience the endgame, as it's a fast way to bypass any gatekeeping and is a relatively easy class to pilot. But easy to use and easy to use effectively are two different things. Supports can shape a raid's smoothness. You can see this from raid to raid, but I think the average support is lacking the fundamental baselines like brand and attack buff differences to really excel at their class. I know this for a fact. I've seen enough raid stats shown to me by holy men to know 50 to 60% uptime is a common occurrence in pug lobbies. With the onset of solo raids in our near future and it seeming like brand uptime being a huge part of the solo support functionality to that experience, I saw no better time to get my support friends to give me 5 things they wish new supports would know, with a special one at the very end that I was instructed to reiterate. So follow along as we go over supporting for dummies in Lost Ark. The most obvious aspect to supporting is the heals you provide. Bards drop a pool of healing, artists have a little golden nuggets you must eat, and Paladin has healing over time via its one shield and its identity ability. The key here is knowing when to use this. Classes like Bard and Artist have to give up other aspects of their supporting to focus heal on their party. With raid experience comes knowledge of when is ideal to help these members rather than the other buffs. But note that newer players will likely rely on heals more, but more experienced groups will likely get testy if they received a heal rather than an attack buff on a DPS moment. You will learn that there's 3 types of DPS: new or inexperienced players only wanting heals, those who want a mix of health and attack buffs, and then the gremlins who only want attack buffs with a tad bit of damage prevention with more attack buffs on top. The classes have different variants of this, but having a good attack buff uptime throughout the damage portions of the raid differentiates a decent support from a great one. Most DPS won't notice less damage taken throughout the raid, but they sure will notice a significant boost in the numbers they see. Note, your attack buffs efficiency is tied directly to your base attack power stat. So things like a more honed weapon or additional stats that help boost your class's scaling stat will increase the numbers in which the party sees. Classes like Bard have an enhanced 3 bubble attack buff that absolutely jacks up the DPS damage numbers. Having large cooldown gems and a high swiftness stat is a surefire baseline to have uptime be large. But knowing you shouldn't overlap your buffs in certain cases is key, as the overlap is actually not beneficial. In the example of Paladin, overlapping Heavenly Blessings and Wrath of God doesn't actually double the buffs, it's just the one. So spacing this out and keeping an eye on the debuff bar for when it runs out, then have it replaced, will be one of your main things you will be doing during the raid in the back of your mind. Although very similar, branding is something that will overlap with your attack buff for additional party damage. Typically it's 1, but maybe 2 skills with a tripod that signifies an increase of 10% damage for the party, thus signifying that it is a brand. This brand is not permanent and will require constant throwing throughout the fight, typically going for close to 100% uptime of both attack buffs and brand for all attacks in your party is the ideal situation, but on average isn't realistic. But those whom get close to this mark are typically the DPS's favorite supports and will make you stand above the rest. I'm dubbing this damage prevention, as damage reduction and shields have slight differences, but damage prevention is all encompassing of the effect. Shields are basically a magic shield overlaid your health bar of additional protection of your health, but with a strong enough hit will be depleted or just if its timer runs out. Damage reduction, or DR as it's commonly called, is similar, but its main thing that I was instructed to make clear is that it specifically makes the damage taken a smaller percentage. The most obvious instance of this is the bosses themselves. When transitioning, the raid boss typically goes into a phase of DR where they take vastly reduced amounts of damage, and typically DPS don't attack besides the gauge builders in this instance. Knowing how to DR effectively is tied intrinsically to raid knowledge, as knowing large DPS windows that you can create for your party by blanketing them with this damage prevention is huge for skilled lobbies. This is the unsung hero of the buffs that you give to your party. The average player won't realize they haven't needed to pot at all because of your hard work, but the knowledgeable few will cherish the moments that you have given them. There are 3 different supports currently in Lost Ark. Each provides its variant of a specialty that it brings to the table. Knowing how your support excels over others should be utilized, as most of your DPS will make certain assumptions about the playstyle that you will provide. Paladin is by far the easiest support to play, as it's basically a Wi-Fi tower of buffs. As long as you're in its radius, you can send these buffs to multiple party members in various locations. Has great uptime ease, a party cleanse, and high stagger. Artist is considered the fun to play support, with healing bubbles for members to manually consume, party teleports, a cleanse, and decent stagger. This class functions as a middle ground between the 2 other supports. Bard is the more difficult to play at its peak efficiency. It gives the strongest buffs, the best healing, and a skill that gives push immunity, but has little stagger and no cleanse. If played at its highest level, it is typically the most wanted support, but once again, the average Bard isn't playing at this level. So, knowing the differences between these supports and knowing the specialty in which yours thrives will allow you to excel in these specialties. Like I said, most parties will move around players based on which support they have. Some will even specifically take you over another based on these specialties. Whether it's a cleanse, incredible stagger, large on-demand attack buffs, or just a teleport away from danger. Know what makes your support special and utilize these strengths to get in and excel in your lobbies. Set bonus is a key feature of rating and playstyle, and the one supports only take at this current moment is Yearning. Yearning, if you haven't noticed, is the giant circle that surrounds the support's wide radius. Besides this giant hula hoop, it provides very important buffs for just being inside its proximity, that being an attack buff and a swiftness % increase. The damage buff is very nice, but the swiftness added is a huge part of making the current meta classes function properly. This, for one, makes the slowness of crit spec classes more bearable, but specifically, any class that uses Raid Captain usually accounts for the swiftness increase from this circle for their damage engraving. So make sure your Yearning is up, but also that you are somewhat in proximity of your party members. Typically they will follow you around, but some pug lobby supports sometimes are frolicking in the flowers mid-fight. Now obviously there are caveats to this, like Echidna has supports scouting blue squares quickly, but knowing how important this simple positioning of yours is to your team is a huge part of the buffs that you bring to the table. Side note, most of you will have this, but there are some of you out there. Make sure you have level 3 Yearning set. There are some Party Finder level 2 Yearning folks out there asleep. I don't know any though. Now, this is the tip I was informed to reiterate. Check your buff bar. This is the best way to tell what's active and the time left on it. Eventually, you will get a second-hand nature of just knowing internally what's up, but until then, this is the best guide for knowing what you need to do next. Check your settings and prioritize these buffs to show up with their own priority on your buff bar, and you can even enlarge them for easier visual confirmation. Note, I believe your brand is directly tied to the boss, so seeing it on the boss's buff bar is also something to look out for. I know this may be very obvious to many of you, but those who are newer or just have been coasting may not realize these basic fundamentals that could really up their gameplay. In the grand scheme, this won't necessarily affect you, but it will make those you are playing with appreciate you more. Or you could just not care and make those with the Bible lose their minds in silence. If you found this video helpful, check out my playlist for new and returning players for more helpful content to up your game. I'll see you in the next one.